Okay, come close. Are you ready to go to work? Are you ready to go to work? Okay, let's go find it. Oh, good boy. Let's go find it. Good searching. Check here. Good searching. That's right. Oh, good job.
Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. This invasive mussel detection that happened last fall has been a huge game changer for Montana, as you can imagine. It's something that's affected every Montanan. And so I'm here today to talk about what we've been through, how we're dealing with the response, and what our future looks like in terms of managing this situation, so that possibly you can learn from our mistakes. And if mussels do eventually get here, you will be better prepared to deal with dealing with that.
In late fall of 2016, water sampling from water bodies in Montana's Missouri River Basin indicated the presence of aquatic invasive mussel larvae. This is the first evidence of these mussels in Montana. Infestations of aquatic invasive mussels in other states have caused significant damage to ecosystems, fisheries, hydroelectric facilities, municipal water supplies, agricultural infrastructure, and recreational equipment. An interagency Montana mussel response team was established, and Montana Governor Steve Bullock declared a statewide natural resource emergency. The mussel response team, in an effort to protect Montana's water bodies, restricted boating on both Tiber and Canyon Ferry reservoirs on December 1st, 2016. The response team also expedited the processing of water samples from across Montana, recruiting help from laboratories in Colorado to assist Montana's fishery labs with their processing. In mid-December 2016, the response team convened a panel of experts from around the state and the country with experience in aquatic invasive species. The panel committed to an ongoing dialogue to support short and long-term efforts. Looking ahead, the response team is coordinating a variety of task forces focusing on containment and control strategies, along with continued prevention, outreach, and education. The long-term goal is to reduce the impact to Montana's economy and its resources.
Aquatic invasive species are not new to Montana. We've had an aquatic invasive species program for several years. As you can see, we started our early detection and monitoring efforts in the early 2000s. That also included the education and outreach with the public. The watercraft inspection stations, which is our best bet at prevention because boats happen to be the #1 vector for transporting these things, began in 2004, and as in 2011, it was unlawful not to stop at an inspection station if you were carrying a boat. So the program has been around for a while. It was funded at $2.4 million every 2 years, $1.2 million a year, and that was the situation before October 2017. And just to go back a little, what are aquatic invasive species? I think we probably have a mixed crowd of knowledge here, but aquatic invasive species are non-native. They're harmful to the native aquatic ecosystem. They crowd them out, they outcompete them, and they become a monospecies essentially in the ecosystem. Why are they the worst one? The impacts are felt by everyone. I think Lisa touched on this in the beginning. Recreation is the most obvious one, at least in Montana. That's where we focused our efforts because that's what we do in Montana. We have beautiful waters. We recreate, people have boats, and these invasive mussels, if they were to get in our waterways, they clog up boats. Invasive weeds clog up boats. And then they also, imagine your Okanagan here, if you got these invasive mussels, and these are the adult versions, shells all over your beaches. You can't even walk on the beach. So things as simple as that, so with recreation. The hydropower industry, these things get into their nooks and crannies of all their infrastructure, they clog them, and then there's no way to get rid of these things. There's no way to eradicate them. So what you're dealing with is mitigation, and mitigation can cost hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. They predict in the Columbia River Basin, they did a study that if there was a mussel detection there, they think it would cost $500 million a year just to mitigate the impacts. And they're easily spread. Here's a map of the distribution of aquatic weeds in Montana, just to give you a look. Through all that early detection and monitoring, we've identified populations of aquatic weeds across Montana. This map used to be combined with this map, but as of the new detections, we've had to break them out because it's just becoming too much of a rainbow to actually read the map. So this shows the New Zealand mud snail, which is an invasive snail that we have, as well as the mussel larva detections. So the invasive mussels detections, what actually happened? The Bureau of Reclamation, who's the federal agency that owns Tiber Reservoir, which is where the first detection was, notified our Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks with their positive detection. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks immediately went to pull their samples and retest them and take additional samples. And lo and behold, they found a positive sample as well. Those samples were then sent to California for verification. And again, they verified and corroborated that those were invasive mussel larvae. So we call this a positive water body for invasive mussels. In Canyon Ferry, where they had the same set of circumstances, again, it's a Bureau of Rec, went out, did the sampling, retested samples, but were never able, the independent lab in California was never able to verify that it was actually an invasive mussel. Nonetheless, Montana is treating that water body just as it's treating Tiber Reservoir, as if invasive mussel larvae is there. And I just want to point this out. This is what we found. We did not find those adults. What we found right now is the juvenile stage. These are like death specks. They're so juvenile, in fact, we don't even know if it's a quagga or a zebra mussel. We don't know what it would mature into. And this is really good news. First of all, it means our early detection and monitoring program is working. And those dollars are very well spent. And secondly, because they're not adult mussels, we know this is a very, very, very early form of infestation, if these things even take hold. There is still hope that they might not necessarily develop and mature. So here's a map of Tiber Reservoir. There were 2 positive detections down here in this area and also up in that Willow Creek area. And here's a map of Canyon Ferry Reservoir. There was just 1 hit over here in the silos. So what did we do? What did we do when we got this news? Unfortunately, Montana was not completely prepared. We had a rapid response plan that we could use, but it was not a plan that we had customized for our state. It was a regional plan. And we did not have a process in place for how we were going to respond, who had the roles and responsibilities. And so it was a little chaotic in the beginning, and this is a good lesson to be learned about preparing for these sorts of detections and invasive species introductions. So the first thing we did, there were several things going on. One was, let's try and define the extent of the situation. So we went back out to both those water bodies and did additional sampling. There are the microscopes. That's how they look to see what the species are. We needed to do visual inspections. Yes, we knew we had the invasive mussel larvae, but are there any adults there? So through various means, they did shoreline walks. They had divers, snorkelers looking at docks and substrates. These things affix themselves to anything. We also had help from our neighbors in Canada, and Cindy and Hilo came down. And this is a new thing for them, and I think Cindy's going to talk about this. They're used to inspecting boats, so adapting them to these shoreline searches was new. And we weren't sure if it was going to be successful, but it was wildly successful. The dogs there were a few hits where they thought they detected stuff, but after visual observation, still no adults have been found. So that is really good news, and again speaks to the infancy of this situation. So those were the first sort of activities that we did. And in the meantime, we were working with our governor and our leaders of our state to enact an executive order that declared a natural resource an emergency. It directed all the state agencies to work together. This wasn't a fish, wildlife, and parks issue. This is an issue that impacted all the agencies across Montana, as well as our stakeholders, our irrigators, our fishing industry folks. The people that this impacts is just gigantic, as well as the provinces to the north of us and all the states around us, and particularly the states to the west of the Continental Divide that are still mussel-free, which is Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. So we knew it was going to be a huge, heavy lift to respond to this situation. And this executive order was hugely helpful in getting all that interagency collaboration. And when we had to call transportation and say, we need you to go get some signs out for us, they have funding issues and everything else, but a document like this that was issued by the governor gave us the muscle, if you will, to be able to get what we needed to get out of our partners. It also directed us to mobilize the response under the incident command system. Not sure if everyone is familiar with that, but it was used for that Valdez oil spill, for example. We use it at DNRC for fire. We manage fires in Montana, and that's the system that organizes the structure and the hierarchy and the process for how you respond to that. So we got $750,000 in funding. So, we're a bunch of scientists working on mussels. We need finance people. We need administrative people. We need hiring people. And that's what the incident command system enabled us to do, was to sort of compartmentalize everything and get all the different sorts of skill sets that we needed in order to respond. It also directed the mussel response team to come up with several plans. There was the immediate response, which I talked about, trying to define the extent of the situation. There was the extended response, which is figuring out getting ready for ice off, which has already happened in Montana, so we were past that time. But everything sort of froze over at the time this was happening, and we knew as soon as that ice came off, boats are going to start moving. So we got to get ready to get everything in place, and that is now in place. But we had a deadline. We only had a few short months to do this. So there was that extended response plan, and then there's the long term. It's not only setting up for this season, but what are we going to do for the long term? So there were several plans in action. As the video said, another thing that declaration allowed us to do was do some restrictions and closures, which we did do. Here is a photograph of the incident command team. It just looks like a big meeting, but the amount of work and the brains behind this operation was hugely impressive. We had folks at one point, I think they estimated over 200 state employees, and not just state employees. We had fire department folks join us who had incident command system. We had Department of Emergency Service folks. We had watershed groups help us. We had help from our neighbors. We had help from scientists and technical experts. This wasn't just a government down response. It was this is everyone's problem. We need everyone to help us solve it. And so what we did here was we broke into task groups. But what are the main things that we need to prepare for? So, and what are the things that we could do to potentially control these populations? So we did look at chemical controls, and we all know, or we don't all know, but I can tell you there are not a lot of good options out there. This is not an eradication situation. This is a management and containment. That's the word I was looking for. Containment issue. We had folks looking at drawdown. Drawdown would be great. If you can draw down that water, expose those things to air, they die. They're aquatic. They like water. So if you can do that, that would be great. But the political considerations, downstream users, all those things, when we looked at the drawdown option, it just wasn't feasible. We had folks looking at prevention in terms of bolstering the watercraft inspection program. We had folks looking at sampling and monitoring, our protocols and our capacity and our lab equipment and all that stuff. So all these groups are working on all these different pieces that were pulled into this big plan. We also had a science advisory panel, 2 days in Helena, where we had experts from all over the nation. I'm not sure if anyone from Canada joined us, but we did have folks as far as DC and some of the Department of Interior offices come and look at the body of work that those task force groups did to vet it and talk about it and say, scientifically, does this stuff make sense? Because science does drive a lot of our decisions. So I am the Invasive Species Advisory Council coordinator, and the council was directed to work on this long-term plan. We sat around the table and we didn't really know where to start, but then it occurred to us, we had just produced this document. This document was just finalized about November 5th, so right in the thick of that time. And what this document is 2 years of work that the council did assessing our invasive species programs in Montana, vetting the issues and priorities with stakeholders we had meetings all over the state. We had a statewide summit in April 2016 to look at all these objectives and tasks and say, does this resonate with you? Are we hitting the high points of what we need to be thinking about here in terms of invasive species? So we knew this was accepted, vetted, and embraced by our stakeholders, and we knew this was the best roadmap we had. So we were able to pull out the objectives and tasks that related to invasive mussels to start building that plan. So between that information that came out of this, the framework, as well as the information that the task teams pulled in, we were pretty able to quickly pull together a pretty good plan in a very short amount of time. In January, the legislature meets in Montana every 2 years, and this was the year that they came to town. We knew we needed money. And so another huge thing that was going on behind the scenes was working with our governor and our legislature to figure out how the heck we're going to fund this thing. This was a set of recommendations. They started on January 1st. January 16th, we were already presenting this stuff to the legislature. So our recommendations basically boil down to these 6 items. Strengthen invasive species program. We know our aquatics program can only be enhanced by having a better overarching invasive species program. Expanding our prevention efforts through the watercraft inspection program. Expanding our monitoring program. Do more samples at more water bodies. Strengthen management of the aquatic invasive species program. So we've just currently, as of this week, hired a new bureau chief who it's a brand new role in Montana, but is going to take leadership with the aquatic invasive species program. Strengthen statewide, oh, that's a duplication I just see. And then develop a future rapid response plan, not only for new mussel detections, but also for any sort of invasive species that could be coming to town. And here it is. This is the new program. This is the new look, the clean, drain, dry. Mussel alert. You're going to be, if you come to Montana, you're going to be seeing these images. So what exactly are we doing? One of the first things we did is we needed new laws and new rules. So this is now effective if you come into Montana with any sort of vessel. It doesn't just have to be a power boat. It can be a paddleboard or a kayak or something like that. You must stop to be inspected before you launch in any water body. You're just going through the state, you know, there's probably no risk there. But if you plan to launch in any water in Montana, you must be inspected. You will go through a risk interview, and based on that risk assessment, you could potentially have to be decontaminated, which is how it's a 130-degree hot water wash that kills any invasive species. The other thing we did is put rules in place that if you're going from the east side of the Continental Divide, which is the Rocky Mountains, to the west side, you must also be inspected. Why is that so important? On the west side of the divide is the Columbia River Basin. It is the only river basin in the United States that is known to be mussel-free at this time. So very, very, very important to protect that. New decontamination requirements, ramp restrictions, a local boater program. All those things are new to the state of Montana in regards to preventing and managing invasive mussels. So inspection stations 2017. This is what an inspection station looks like. I'm not sure if you've all been through one. And that's a decontamination unit there where they're spraying down that boat. And here's a map about where those stations are going to be. Previously, we've had 17 stations open. This year, it's more than doubled. Not only is the state doubling up on its, we've gotten a lot of local interest and partners who are opening up their own stations at their water bodies. It might not be a high priority as far as when the state looks at everything holistically, but to those locals, that lake is their lake and they want to protect it. So they're going to open up their own station and they're going to protect that lake. So you can see the blues and the stars and the blacks. Those are all different forms of station, whether a partner station or state-run station or what have you. Containment zones. So we do have mussels in Tiber Reservoir right now. The only way to ensure that they don't spread is to make sure any boat coming off that water body, again, goes through a risk assessment and is decontaminated if they're going to be launching in any other water body. The local boater program is for folks who live close to Tiber and they're in and out of Tiber all the time. They don't go to any other water body. So they're going to be able to get like a fast pass. Same at Canyon Ferry. But containing the invasive mussels to those water bodies is what the priority here is. They're not spread from these water bodies. So those are containment areas. Enforcement, this is a new one for us. We have had enforcement present at watercraft inspection stations in the past. Not there all the time, but they float in and they float out. We've had a problem with drive-bys, people not following the rule, or the law, actually. This year, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has hired 4 full-time dedicated AIS wardens, and they're going to be at the stations, and they're going to be on water bodies, and if you don't have the seal that shows that you've gone through an inspection, or you drive by, Montana's not going to be nice anymore. You're going to get fined, you're going to be ticketed, and those fines are a lot steeper than they were originally. They're still working that out in the legislature right now, but they've gone up considerably. Monitoring, we're ramping up our monitoring efforts. Again, increasing sampling from 610 to more than 1,500 and increasing to more than 200 water bodies. So we know early detection and monitoring, that's how you figure out if you have these things. So increasing that program is one of the main places we're going to enhance our efforts. Education and outreach. Again, this isn't just an agency thing. This isn't something that the state of Montana is doing, but it's really about behavior. It's really everyone's responsibility to clean, drain, dry if you're using any of these vessels in water bodies. you clean off the mud, water and vegetation, you remove the boat plugs and drain the water. You dry everything off, drying your ballast, and clear through full heading. So all those things need to be done, and everybody needs to take responsibility with that with their own equipment. So education and outreach is going to be a huge, huge piece of how we communicate with our visitors and Montanans about how to take their own personal responsibility to prevent this. And lastly, I just want to talk about response preparedness. Like I said, Montana wasn't necessarily in the best place. We didn't have the tools we needed in place to really go after this. I think we did a tremendous job considering, you know, this has just been 6 months ago, and we were able to pull it together. But we want to do further planning. We're going to be out there sampling as soon as the water temperatures are ideal. And it's quite conceivable that we'll have another detection. So what are we going to do? We've obviously have the lessons learned, but right now we're working on, we do have a plan now, but we're working on testing that plan. So the way that we do that is we actually have exercises. So we've already had our first one, which was the tabletop exercise, and it's going through the plan and making sure, hey, Hank, you know you're going to get this call, and when you get that call, you tell this guy to make this call. It's also getting your environmental assessments prepared so that if there is a chemical treatment, you can understand what your options may be. It's having your templates for your press releases and your emergency declarations and all that stuff on the ready so that if you get the call, you can push the button and you don't have to recreate this stuff. So not only is Montana doing that, well, we're doing this on a pretty large scale, actually. We're going to be doing them at site-specific at Tiber and Canyon Ferry, both plans, management plans that are site-specific, as well as rapid response plans for each of those water bodies, as well as just anywhere else, you name the location plans. And then we also want to work with our regional partners to do, if there was a detection in the Columbia River Basin, how are we all going to band together and work on the response? And then at the higher level, we're also working on being prepared for any invasive species emergency. Emerald ash borer is one that we are really freaked out about right now, and the potential of that coming in and decimating all of our ash trees in the city. It's cost Boulder, Colorado, for example, millions and millions of dollars to deal with that. So we're looking at planning on lots of different levels. And lastly, like I've said before, it comes back to personal responsibility and clean, drain, dry. So I encourage you all to do that, and thank you again. I hope that you've learned a little bit about Montana's experience and what you don't want to go through.